And welcome back. And now this time we're going to look at structure and strategies. Up to this point, we've talked about an overview. We've gone into goals and objectives. Now we need to start looking at how are we going to put this together. We've looked at some specific instances, but now we're going to look a little bit more on a global scale. I will say this is going to be in 2 installments. This first video is really just going to look at the broad brush overview on how this is all structured. And then in the second video, we will get a little bit more granular and looking specifically at how do we do this from class period to class period. Okay? So the first is looking at, number one, the big overview. And we've talked about this up until this point. Sound before sight. Prepare, present, practice. Exploration, imitation, improvisation, composition. These are the processes, these are the big pictures of how we take students from the unknown to the known, okay? Or from an old known through the unknown to a new known, okay? So this is that spiral curriculum. This is that understanding that students first learn through imitation, and then we experience it, and then we label it, and now we're at a new known. And that's the process that we have to keep in mind, is that if these are in fact the way that students best learn music, then how do we construct an experience over that? How do we put together the big picture for our beginning ensembles? And I put this picture back up for you to remember and to recall that there are a lot of different ways for us to really take the students through the process, and that we can be on lower order thinking skills, but we can also access the higher order thinking skills along the way. For the way that we set up our warm-ups, this might be we sing and they repeat back on their instruments, different tonal patterns. Or we might sing on solfege and they sing back on solfege. This would be verbal association. That would be lower order thinking skills. So there are different ways for us to access that. I just wanted to provide this as a reference so that you remembered that we had discussed that and how the brain thinks about music as we're learning it. Because this is going to serve as the foundation for how we are going to design what we do in the classroom. Okay, so now thinking about activity plans. Okay, here, as you go through the process, whenever you create your curriculum, whenever you're looking at putting together an entire year, you're going to break it into chunks. You might break it into performance chunks. So for 7th and 8th grade, band, choir, orchestra, you might do it in terms of concerts. But with the beginning ensemble, it's a little bit different. So what you want to do is you want to find out, okay, where do you want them to be when they go into your advanced ensembles? And then work their way back to where you're getting them from elementary school. And so you might break this into, okay, we're going to break it into quarters. And by the end of quarter 1, with rhythm, I want them here. With tone, I want them here. With note reading, I want them here. And you lay all of that out. The way you're going to do that is through writing objectives or goals for each quarter. And each quarter is going to sequentially get more difficult to arrive at where you want them, the beginning of their advanced ensemble for the following year. So now, within each one of those quarters, you're going to have a set of activity plans. And there you're going to have objectives. You're going to align them with the current standards, create, perform, respond, depending on where they fall there, what materials you're going to need, sequence from start to end, assessments that you're going to use, and possible extensions. Why extensions? Well, in beginning ensembles, what you're going to find is some students move way faster than others. So there are going to have to be ways that you can continue to work on the foundation while giving challenges to those that have already met your expectations. So what are those extensions going to look like? What are they? How are they going to operate? What are your measurements? How are you going to be able to track that? How is that going to impact your future instruction? All of that is is necessary in the planning and preparation. But this just gives you a structure, a framework for how to make it work. And then you can plug in where you need to. So sequence of instruction, instructional strategies, whole part whole, simple to complex, modeling. Now, remember here, this is one area where I will say almost everybody forgets the minute they start student teaching, they leave their instrument at the door. They leave it in the car. They leave it at home, instead of always having their instrument by their side. There's not a day that I taught in the public schools that I didn't have my horn by my side, whether I was teaching high school wind ensemble or I was teaching beginning band. I had my trombone with me all the time. If I was teaching beginning woodwinds, I had my clarinet with me. I was constantly playing. I constantly wanted them to hear, because me being able to play for them provided a characteristic tone. It provided a point of reference, and it allowed me to say more than what my words could convey. If I say, make it sound like this, they have an oral perception. If I say, no, I want you to sit like this, I want you to put your tongue exactly where the gum meets the tooth at exactly 3 clicks per second. And then what I want you to do is I want you to blow the air at 64.7 miles an hour. It doesn't matter what I tell them to do. I'm just going to tie them in knots. If I say, play it like this, they're going to model. So modeling is imperative. It's critical to the success of your beginning ensembles. Cooperative learning techniques. This can be think, pair, share. This can be, stand partners for assessment. And we'll go over that when we talk about beginning band assessment. But ways to encourage interaction among your students. That's going to be important moving forward as well. And then how to ask questions. How to ask leading questions, how to get them to deeper understandings through the use of your questions. It's not always known answer questions or hypothetical questions or rhetorical questions. Those can all get you in trouble. It's being able to ask questions that are guiding them to deeper understanding. And a lot of times we don't think about structuring those. We don't think about planning those. So in your lesson plans, always think about adding those in. Excuse me. So thinking about how to ask questions and put them in sequence so that you know about here, I need to ask this question. Because I can guarantee you in your first years of teaching, you're going to be so worried about Johnny setting Sally on hair on fire over here in the percussion section, that you're not thinking about, oh, I need to ask this really wise question right here. You're looking at classroom management. You're looking at, oh my gosh, can you please play a concert F? That's all I want you to do. I just want you to put the horns on your face and play a note. That's it. That's what you're focused on, not on, I wonder what critical thinking question I can ask. You're not thinking about that. So if you put it into your lesson plans, if you put it into your structure, if you put it into your overall plan, you will remember. So you've got to craft those and think about how you're going to ask them, think about how you're going to engage your students in those discussions. Because if that becomes part of the procedures of your classroom, then they become much more comfortable with that. Okay? So this is just a reminder. I wanted to put that out there. Again, count and finger with modeling, sizzle and finger with modeling, sizzle and finger again with modeling, perform, repeat and rinse, move to the next chunk, put chunks together, move back in the sequence a little bit, going forward. Okay, remembering that this sequence is built around the bigger picture. That bigger picture that I put over here, it's all modeled after this. Okay, so understanding sound before sight, understanding how the brain processes music. So remembering this process, this sequence, in every part. So this might be to learn a piece of music. This might be to sight read. If you go through this process and a hybrid of it, it will work every single time. Okay, so now let's talk about lesson cycles. So if we know what the structure is somewhat supposed to be like, now we've got to figure out, okay, so what is the timing of all of this? What does it look like? Okay, so most of your lesson cycles are going to be around 7 to 9 minutes in length. Okay, now where do I come up with that number? Well, most of the time, you're with fifth graders, okay, and sixth graders, you're going to be dealing with probably anywhere from 10 to 12-year-olds, depending on the time of the year and their ages, but anywhere from 10 to 12 years old, okay? Now, most of the time you get about a minute per year of age, okay? Understand that elementary school is a little bit different. Middle school, they're still growing into themselves. So I always err on the side of caution and make these a little bit shorter. You don't want to push their full 12 minutes, because if you push full 12 minutes, you're going to lose something on the edges. Okay, so we shorten that a little bit and we say, okay, 7 to 9 minutes is what I want a lesson cycle to be. Okay, so that means that middle part, the middle 5 minutes, okay, of a 9-minute cycle, or the middle 3 minutes of a 7 cycle. You've got 2 minutes at the beginning, 2 minutes at the end, 2 minutes to warm up, 2 minutes to close it up, and then everything in the middle is where they're most engaged. All right, so if I know that I'm working on that cycle, okay, you get about 2 minutes for intro, 3 to 5 minutes for instruction, 2 minutes out. What that's going to expand to is that you've got about 3 to 4 cycles within any given teaching period, okay? That means that whenever I'm teaching, that if I know I've got 40 minutes, that I'm going to have 4 objectives, 4 things I want to hit. And so each objective, I'm going to have 7 to 9 minutes to drive home, okay? Which means I need to have some way to introduce it, some way to work on it, and then that last piece needs to be closure of one objective, but it needs to function as the intro into the next. So we're looking at that as being a transition. The last one obviously is going to be closure, okay? So we want to dovetail this. Now remember, as they're coming down off of 1, we have to give them some release, because we cannot maintain them at full engagement for a full 40 minutes. It's not going to happen. That's where classroom management issues become an issue. So we need to make sure that as they're coming down off of one cycle, that it's leading into the next, it's adding as the intro, and so it looks like a sine wave. And then we bring them up, we hold them, and then we bring them down, and then we bring them back up. So understanding that we can dovetail these, and that the closure of one can be the intro of another, but we have to understand that we're in a valley, and then we'll have to ramp them back up and then hold them there for a little bit, okay? But understanding that we're going to have 3 to 4 of those, and so when we plan, we can't plan to move too quickly, but we also don't want to move too slowly. Okay, so we want to have just more than what we know we can get to, just in case we're having a good day, we get through a little bit extra. Or if we don't get through everything, we know that we're not going to get bored. Okay, so we stack these based on need and direction. Well, what do I mean by lesson stacking? Okay, so number 1, I want you to think prepare, present, and practice. Okay, I want you to think about, all right, 2 of these cycles might be prepare. I might be presenting and labeling something new for 3, and then we're going to bring back something old for practice. Or it might be, okay, I'm going to work on this, 1 prepare, 1 present, and 2 practice. Depending on where they're at in the process. If we use that idea of prepare, present, practice, which is a CODI methodology, It aligns directly with what we are thinking about sound before sight. It works with all of those other topics as well. If we keep that in mind, then we can put together a clear structure. So it's going to look something a little like this. In our prepare, we might be playing songs containing the musical concept. Our warm-ups are going to be based around a concept that we're going to be working on down the road. Body percussion that mimics patterns, so that they are internalizing patterns that they're going to be working on either in a song down the road or in a line down the road. Okay, so you're thinking 2 or 3 pages in the method book down the road, but you're prepping it early on with a warm-up. You're prepping it with a body percussion, with a rhythmic intro. Okay, listen to music containing the musical concept. That's how we begin to prepare it. In the present, we identify it, we name it, we label it, and we present it in symbolic form. So this might be 2 or 3 sessions down the road. Now we've put it in front of them, and then we add it into practice later on. Okay, so what I've done here is I've shown you this is what it looks like in prepare, present, practice. This goes from rote into reading, sound to sight, dependent to independent musician. And that's essentially how we have everything designed. Okay, so if we know that with rhythm, we're going to look at, we want them to be at point B, and they're currently on point A, then we have to look at all the concepts that we're going to have to prepare. And then we know what they're going to be. We know that how we're going to have to label them. And then we know how we want to practice them. This is music selection. This is line selection. This is that ability to label it. These are your warm-ups, and these are all of the, whether they be etudes or anything that you want to practice over here, are going to be preparing for what you're going to be doing over here. Okay, so what does that look like in terms of rehearsal or beginning band prep? Okay, well, first of all, we have to define the musical concept. How are we going to have them move? How are we going to have them listen? How are we going to have them reading? How are we going to have them playing their instruments, composing, improvising, singing, and chanting? And then how do we have them interact with that musical concept? So it might be syncopation. What did they do? Well, all of a sudden, we identify all of the lines that show syncopation. In the method book we're using, we identify pieces of music that have syncopation that we're working on, and we're going to introduce that in a way that looks a little bit like this. So we see them in class period. We work on line 14, 17, and 21. Okay? Now, this next class period, we're going to review 14. Well, that's going to be practice, right? And then we're looking at line 17, and we're at line 21, but we're adding line 22 in a self-made worksheet. This next period, we've dropped line 14, and we're doing 17, we're doing 21, self-made worksheet, and then an own composition. Now here, you've seen we're moving from lower order thinking to higher order thinking, okay, all the way down into this own composition. All the meanwhile, this is informing what we're going to be doing on line 25. So this self-made worksheet and this own composition is related to 25 or this new song or 27 in some way, shape, or form, because we're going to come back to it. We're going to work on it again. But now, this class period, we introduce line 25. So now they see the connection. And so all of this is interwoven. So we think about, here's the musical concept, here's the class period, here's what we're going to use to teach it, and here's how we're going to stack it. Okay, what does that look like in a rehearsal? Very similar. Okay, it might be how we teach section A. Okay, it might be how we teach section B, and then getting into student self-peer assessment and summative evaluations. You can see how we stack it and organize it. Now, this might be Over here, this might be a completely different piece. Or what we might do is we might say section A, section B, and then piece 2. We're introducing it. And then slowly you can move this around, but you see how you chunk this out so that it makes musical sense to them. And all of these are aligned with your scope and sequence. So you know where the students need to be at the end of the year, and you're taking them step by step along that way. Again, remember, at younger ages, they are not able to process the larger picture as quickly. So you have to do this in chunks initially. For your beginners, I would say 2-bar phrases. And then you can extend to 4 by the end of the year, but still teaching 2 to 4-bar phrases. When you start with your advanced ensembles, you start with those 4-bar phrases. Okay, and then you get into 8-bar. You might get into 16 by the end of that first year, but most of the time you're not going to push 8 up until maybe they're freshmen. Okay, and then you can get into 16, and then they're going to be able to process at a faster rate, and they're going to be able to process larger chunks. Okay, but you have to build them to that point. Okay, this is beginning band techniques. So 2 to 4-bar phrases. Okay, and this can go as far again as 8th or 9th grade, depending on their developmental level. They're not trained musicians. Keep this in mind. The process of sight reading and making musical decisions is a process and has to be trained and taught. Remember, in the how to teach a line, we're only looking at notes and rhythms. You have a whole nother set of processes to begin saying, okay, now once we get into 16-bar phrases, you might say, okay, now this time when you count it musically. And then when they count it, say, well, that wasn't musical. What can we do to make it more musical? Well, we can add in a crescendo and a decrescendo. Crescendo up for 4, down for 4. Okay, put it in this time. Let's see what happens. Excellent. Now let's sizzle and finger it. Oh, you didn't do the same dynamics. Now we can start to talk about dynamics, why we make certain decisions, and that's how we teach it. We teach it through that process. But if you try and have them throw it in on top of also thinking about decoding the notes, decoding the tone, making sure that articulations are clear, if we don't isolate that throughout the process, it's not going to work. So we need to make sure that we keep these same processes, and then remembering that they're not trained musicians and that we have to train these musical decisions in throughout the process. How will you structure your classroom to teach, enhance, and promote this process? Okay, and then we get into closure. We move into activity extensions. For those students that are moving a little bit quicker, how are you going to infuse improvisation? How are you going to infuse composition? How are you going to infuse movement, or in some cases choreography? It depends on how you have that set up. But how are you going to include this in your teaching style? How are you going to provide these opportunities for these students to explore? Okay, a simple example of composition is you might be working on, let's say, line 75. Line 75 would be great to perform at the Christmas concert. You know, we've made it up to line 75, and we want to play these for the Christmas concert. Well, it's only 8 measures. Well, we've been working on rhythms. We've been working on a certain set of notes. Well, now all of a sudden we can have that be the A section, and we can create a rondo. And we can do some improvisation. We can do some rhythmic work. We can do body percussion. We can do all sorts of things that are related to that 8-bar theme, and then we come back to it each time. So now we've created a 48, 56 measure composition that we can play, and then we tell the parents they created this themselves. They composed this piece for this specific concert. You're never going to hear this piece again outside of this area. Now, granted, the melody's written for them, but they've gone in and they've composed everything else. That is how you give those extensions. That's how you give that creativity. The students a chance for the creativity. Okay, so we have to have that available to us as well. That also aligns with the new national standards of create, perform, respond. And it also allows the students a chance to practice more and to explore their instruments at a higher level without being encumbered by a specific set of music. Okay, they're only encumbered for that 8 measures that they're playing that melody. From there, it's completely different. Okay, and it's different each time. And we don't know what it's going to sound like. So it's somewhat indeterminate, but it's kind of fun at the same time. Okay? That's where we're going to leave part 1. Part 2, we will begin to look specifically at the actual class meetings themselves.